At the conclusion of the Rams versus Lions Sunday night football matchup, there was a lot of people, whether it be the fans, whether it be the media, or whether it be outside information sources, that still say that the Detroit Lions defense is not good enough. There are people saying that the secondary didn't improve enough, people saying that the run defense took a step back, people saying that this defense is nowhere better than where they were last season, and that they will still be the downfall and the detriment of the Detroit Lions season. Now, today, we're going to take a look at those claims. We're going to take a look at what the Detroit Lions did on the defensive side of the ball versus the Los Angeles Rams, what circumstances they were working with, compare it to the Los Angeles Rams game in the wild card just a few months prior, and talk about the improvement between both games, as well as whether or not the Lions are truly ready to take that next step in the future for the defense. So let's start off by taking a look at what the Lions were able to do on Sunday night. They held Matthew Stafford to a completion percentage of 69%, with completing 34 of his 49 pass attempts, passing for 317 yards, one touchdown, and one interception. On the ground, the rushing defense was really good. 23 attempts for 83 yards as a team for the Los Angeles Rams held them to just 3.6 yards per carry, with one touchdown on the ground from 1 yard out. On third down opportunities, the Detroit Lions allowed just 5 third down conversions on 12 attempts. And of course, the most important statistic of the night is they allowed just 20 points on the entire game, right? As much as Matthew Stafford was able to throw for 300 yards, as much as you might say, oh, Cooper Kupp, slashed and gashed the Detroit Lions defense, they allowed just 20 points. They allowed just two offensive touchdowns in that game, and they were significantly better than they were last time around when they played the Rams. Now, taking a look at a couple of other statistics that I think are really important to keep in mind. The Detroit Lions on Sunday night played 74 snaps on the defensive side of the ball. That is the second most, only behind the Indianapolis Colts, who played 76 defensive snaps. The Detroit Lions played the second most defensive snaps in all of football through week one. They allowed the 25th most yards in the NFL, but when you look at average yards per play, they ranked 15th in the NFL, which isn't elite by any means, of course, but going up against an elite play caller, an elite quarterback, and an elite wide receiver, that's not so bad, considering they went up versus one of the most volatile and, I would argue, that one of the best offenses in the NFL, from play caller to quarterback to weapons, giving up the 15th yards per play in the NFL, in the upper half of the NFL, considering the circumstances the Detroit Lions were under, really isn't all that bad. Right, comparing that back to 2023, the Detroit Lions on defense played the sixth fewest snaps of all NFL teams. They played only 5 NFL teams were on defense less than the Detroit Lions in 2023. And despite that, the Detroit Lions allowed the 19th most yards in the NFL and the 27th most yards per play in the NFL, almost the exact opposite of where they were after week one this year, right? Last year, they weren't on the field a lot, but when they were giving up a lot of yards, a lot of big plays, and a lot of points. This year, they were on the field a ton. They were on the field the second most in the league, and yet they allowed just the 15th most yards per play, and still were pretty good overall when it comes to yards allowed in total. Taking a look at last year's game versus the Los Angeles Rams, Matthew Stafford, on far less passing attempts, had the same completion percentage, threw for 50 more yards and 2 touchdowns as opposed to 0 interceptions. On the ground, the Los Angeles Rams in the wild card went for 17 attempts, 68 yards, and 0 touchdowns, but on a yards per play basis, they rushed for 4 yards per attempt, as opposed to the 3.6 allowed on Sunday night. And of course, again, the important statistic being that the Lions allowed 24 points in that matchup, as opposed to the 20 that they allowed on Sunday Night Football. So from all metrics, comparing these two games, the Detroit Lions certainly got better. They allowed less points. They allowed less rushing yards per attempt. They allowed less passing yards, allowed less passing touchdowns. And overall, they were significantly better. The secondary was better, right? Less passing yards allowed, less passing touchdowns allowed. The pass rush was better. More pressures, more quarterback hits, more sacks. The run defense was better, less yards per play, right? Less of a rushing average. And Kyron Williams, for the second game in a row versus Detroit, was held to a below average day by his standards. The turnovers improved, right? The secondary had an interception and they were able to take the football away, something they weren't able to do last year in the wild card round. Touchdowns allowed improved. Yes, they gave up 2 to 2, right? It was the same number, but the secondary looked better. And without those two pass interference calls in the end zone, which one of them I would say was really soft, and the second one was just a rookie mistake that probably won't happen very often. It was a very awkward situation. Without those two pass interference calls putting the Rams at the 1 yard line, there's a good chance that at least one of those touchdowns doesn't occur, if not both of them, right? The win margin was better. The Lions won by 6 points in Sunday night as opposed to 1 point in the wild card round. And overall, by every metric that you look at, the Detroit Lions defense was improved and they were better despite it being the first game that this secondary played together, right? Despite this being the first game and the rookie debut for Terrion Arnold, despite this being his first game as a Detroit Lion for Carlton Davis, despite the pass rush having new people on the defensive line, right? Ali McNeil was back, but last year he was injured. You have Marcus Davenport, who's brand new. Kyle Pico was brand new. Makai Wingo was brand new, right? The second defensive tackle next to Ali McNeil was different. Last year it was, I don't remember exactly who started versus the Rams, but I know that it wasn't Levi or Kyle Pico, so that second defensive tackle was different. There were changes made to the Detroit Lions defensive front and to their secondary, and this was the first time they've played a live game together. And overall, I thought they were really good. I thought that they had great moments. I thought that they were overall really solid outside of maybe one or two plays, and really outside of looking at it as, oh, the Lions gave up another 300-yard game and looking at just the base statistics, they were significantly better than they were a season ago. And whether you look at it from the tape, you look at it from the numbers, the improvement is impossible to deny. Now, I think the biggest thing that was glaringly obvious after this game from the defensive side of the ball is that Dan Campbell trusts the defense now, right? And I think that the Lions fan base should trust the defense now. Not only trust them to not lose you football games, not only trust them to, go out there and maybe get a couple of turnovers and maybe make a couple of stops so the offense can have that one more opportunity to win a shootout. I think there is true trust and true belief within this defense now to hold offenses to 21 points or less, to hold offenses to bad days by their standards. And I think it shows by the play calling on offense. I think it shows by the decision making at the end of games. And I think it really shows based off of what the Detroit Lions coaching staff chose to do throughout that game. Dan Campbell is known for his fourth down conversions. He's known for being aggressive. And a lot of that had to do with not trusting the defense in years past. If it's 4th and 1 and you're in the opponent's territory, you might as well go for it, because if you punt it and you get it at the 20-yard line, there's a good chance that your defense gets driven on anyway. And within 2 to 3 plays, the opposing offense will be right back at where your offense is currently slated anyway. But this season, and in week 1 specifically, the Lions had just one fourth down attempt. They did convert it. I believe it was a 4th and 1 rush by David Montgomery. They did convert it, and that was in the red zone. But other than that, in third and fourth down opportunities, the Lions were maybe even a little conservative by their standards. They weren't afraid to punt. They weren't afraid to put the ball in the defense's hands, and they weren't afraid of their defense hitting the field. I think, again, another big part of that, the Lions settled for field goals. In years past, when the Lions are in the red zone and it's even feasible, they go for it on fourth down. The prime example is 4th and 5 versus the Los Angeles Chargers. In the second quarter last year, they ran the ball on 4th and 5. They converted, right? But that is not something that you want your team, and not a position you want your team to be in, because they didn't trust the defense and they didn't trust the kicker from that range. Last night and Sunday Night Football versus the Rams, they settled for 2 field goals. Those field goals ended up being the difference in sending the game to overtime. And speaking of that overtime field goal, that was another situation where Dan Campbell showed he trusts the defense, right? He trusted that if the coin flip had gone the other way, that the defense would be able to hold the Rams to nothing, or at the very least a field goal, and give the Lions offense an opportunity to win the game. In years past, again, even looking back to week 15 of last year versus the Dallas Cowboys, the Detroit Lions didn't trust their defense in overtime. They chose to go for a 2-point conversion 3 straight times, other than, and opposed to kicking the field goal, kicking the extra point, and going to overtime. They didn't trust their defense. They felt like they had better odds of winning on a 2-point conversion from the 7-yard line than they did winning that game in overtime if their defense was to hit the field. They deferred the kickoff, something the Lions never, ever did as a offense or as a team last year. They always took the ball first. They always set the tone. They always sent their offense out first because it was better. This year they deferred. They sent their defense out first, and their defense was really strong throughout the game. Now, looking forward throughout the season, right? Because I think that it is important to look at matchups throughout the rest of the season, to take a look at what the Lions have to face throughout the rest of the season. And when you look at it, it's really encouraging to know that this game is probably a top 3 matchup for the Detroit Lions in the entirety of the season, right? I think when you look at the quarterback slate coming up for the next, 15, 16 weeks, there are 3, maybe 4 quarterbacks that you could say are better than Matthew Stafford. That being CJ Stroud, Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, and potentially Jordan Love if he is available to play. I expect that he will be by the time those matchups come around, especially the first one. But you're playing at best, right? In a best case scenario for the other teams, 4 quarterbacks that are better than Matthew Stafford. You're playing maybe 2 offensive coordinators in Matt LaFleur, offensive play callers, I should say, in Matt LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan that are better than Sean McVay. And that is, of course, arguable. You could say that McVay's better than LaFleur, that McVay's better than Shanahan. That's, of course, an opinion that we can argue about. But at worst case scenario, the Detroit Lions are playing 2 offensive play callers better than Sean McVay. They're facing at best 3 wide receivers better than Cooper Kupp, that being CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson twice a season, right? Outside of that, I don't think the Lions secondary sees a wide receiver better than Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. They face maybe at worst 5 teams that are better than the Los Angeles Rams. Potentially the Packers, if you believe so. Potentially the Cowboys, again, if you think that way. The Texans, I would say, are. The 49ers, I would say, are better. And I would say potentially the Bills as well. There's only 2 teams on that list that I would say definitively would go into Los Angeles or host Los Angeles, and I would feel good about their victory odds, that, of course, being the Texans and the 49ers. But I think if you put the Rams up against the Packers, the Cowboys, or the Bills, that's a scrap. That's a fight, and I think either team could come out of that game with a victory. So, yes, the Detroit Lions in their opening night with their brand new secondary, they allowed 300 passing yards. But that's 300 passing yards on 50 passing attempts by Matthew Stafford, whereas last year it was nearly 370 on just 35 passing attempts. So the secondary got better. The Lions last season were not able to get pressure. They weren't able to finish sacks. This season, they had 22 pressures on 50 dropbacks. That is I believe, 49% pressure rate, nearly half the dropbacks that Matthew Stafford had, and the quarterback hit percentage was 12 quarterback hits on 50 dropbacks, nearly 25%. The pass rush was better. The run defense was better. Overall, by every single metric, the Detroit Lions are a better defense, and they played arguably one of their, if not worst, matchups for the entire season in week 1. They walked away with a victory, and I think that they should hold their heads high, and I think Lions fans should have a lot of confidence in this defense as we move forward to the 2024 season. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, of course, what you thought about the defense's performance, what things you were excited about, what things that you are worried about, what things concern you going forward, and let me know how you think and what your expectations are about this defense after the first game. As we move forward, what are your expectations? How do you feel about that first week? And do you think that the Lions defense is better than they were a season ago? Or do you think there is definitely still some room for improvement? I'd be curious what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below, of course, your opinions. And if while you are down there, hit the bell notification and the subscribe button if you enjoy the content. The subscribe button, of course, helps the channel out a ton. And if you like the video, it tells YouTube that, hey, you like the content, and it helps the channel out a ton. So if you could hit those buttons, that'd be fantastic. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.